It's good to see everybody. I imagine everybody else is at the lake or someplace like that on this Labor Day weekend. Hi, Sierra. What's different about you? Is it glasses? Is that what it is? You got contacts? No? Yep. Oh, looks good. Anyway, we're not at the lake. So let's start back in with some of these alleged contradictions. I do have a confession to make. Last week, I have been asking for contradictions that you have run into or things that you think might be contradictions. And we've gotten a couple of those. Last week, I was given one at the end of class, and I didn't catch up with it until just this morning, a little bit ago. And it's the question about women preachers. And that's all I wrote down. Women preachers, contradictions. Were you the one, Sharon, who brought that up? Okay.
About it, and I've done a lot of research on it. And Timothy, 1 Timothy 2, from like 11 to 14, really explains it.
Okay.
So, it talks about it for women. Women are supposed to be silent in the church, and I have a whole article here on it that I'll let you read if you would like.
Sure, I'd be glad to. I'll get that at the end of class. I'd like to read that.
The thing was, somebody asked me if women were allowed to be preachers or teachers, and they said that they had read in the Bible about women prophets and so on and so forth. Well, I found the scriptures for that. The first part of that was talking about the fall of Jerusalem.
Okay.
Where they had come in and the old men would have dreams and the young women would have,
Yes.
young women would have gifts of prophecy and stuff like that. So I did research on that, and I satisfied the person that had asked me the question.
Okay.
So I told them that it wasn't contradictory, that was something that happened then and that was allowed to happen. Women are allowed to be ministering in the church, and they can teach other people. They can teach non-Christian men, and they can teach any woman.
Okay.
The gospel of Christ.
So you guys came to some conclusions with your own study. Some might have the question, though, why would God teach us not to put women in a position of authority over a man, and yet at the same time give some women the ability to prophesy, to have visions, and those kinds of things? My answer to that is, by the way, let's go to 1 Timothy 2 and just see what Paul says about that. One of the things I remind myself is just because God teaches us to do or to not do something doesn't mean that He has to hold Himself to the same standard unless it is a moral standard. And this is not a moral standard that we're looking at. It's simply His instructions for us and what we're supposed to do. It's not where I'm saying, do as I say and not as I do. But we all understand as parents or grandparents that with our children coming up at different stages of life, there are things we allow ourselves to do that we don't allow them to do. How many of you let your 5-year-old drive your car? All right, you can drive the car, but the 5-year-old can't drive the car. That's not being unfair. That's just making sense. And I believe God is the same way with us. So this is what he says in 1 Timothy chapter 2, starting at verse 8. It says, "Therefore I want the men in every place to pray, lifting up holy hands, without wrath and dissension. Likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreetly, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly garments, but rather by means of good works, as is proper for women making a claim to godliness. A woman must quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness, but I do not allow a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man, but to remain quiet. For it was Adam who first who was first created, and then Eve. And it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. But women will be preserved through the bearing of children if they continue in faith and love and sanctity with self-restraint. This, of course, is not the only passage in the New Testament that addresses the idea of the difference between male and female roles in the church, but this is perhaps keystone, because what he's saying is, to me, the key is that a woman shouldn't exercise authority over a man. That's the point. Why is that? Is it based on culture? And he clears that up for us when he says it goes back to the creation. God made the man first, and why did he make the woman? He made the woman to be a helpmate or a helpmeet, to meet the help needs of the man. Does that mean that she is in any way inferior to the man? You may answer that question. No, she's not inferior. If you get back up to Genesis 1, 26 and 27, it says that God made both male and female in his image. So the female is just as much in the image of God as is the male. Who is, it's not the right way to start asking that question. Does God give us a chain of command for himself and his son? He does. 1 Corinthians chapter 11 is one place in particular where it says very clearly, God is the head, Christ is under God. Does that make Jesus Christ inferior to the Father? Or is he just as much God as God the Father?
He's just as much God as God the Father, but he has a different role.
He has a different role. That's it. He has a different role. And we understand that. To a certain extent, we understand it. I don't think we can understand everything about it, but we are not seeing a case where among humans, we're always trying to play one up. What was the discussion that the apostles had among themselves, and Jesus asked them about that, and they were embarrassed to tell him what they were discussing? Do you remember? Okay, who's greatest in the kingdom? And there's 12 of them, and they're going down the road, and they're just going, who's greatest in the kingdom? Well, if they're human beings like they're really supposed to be human beings, they're going to be like the rest of them. Well, I think I'm greatest. And even if you don't say, I think I'm the greatest, in your own mind you're thinking, yeah, guys, it's me. I'm not going to say anything because you're so stupid and you never accept it, but it's me. Just like when we get in a crowd of people, we're probably, who's the smartest person in this room? Oh, it's got to be me. Oh, and Dave is pointing to Judy back there. But that's the human tendency. Our human tendency is, in one way or another, I'm going to prove myself superior to you, whether it's smarter, stronger, faster, more moral, more religious, more pious, whatever it is. Human beings tend to compete with one another, and God did not design us for competition. And that's the big deal with the sex issue problems that we have in this world, of everybody trying to be better, stronger, superior to somebody else. And God did not design any two human beings for competition. He didn't even design us for equality. What he designed us for was unity. If you're smarter than somebody, that means you have a gift God's given you to do something that will help other people who might not be as smart as you. If you're stronger than other people, you have strength given to you from God that you might use to serve other people who are not as strong as you are. If you have a gift for design or engineering or medicine or whatever it is, God didn't give that to us because we're superior to everybody else. He gave that to us so that we might minister to everybody else. What did Jesus say of himself when he came to planet Earth? I did not come to be ministered to. Well, hold on a minute. Did he deserve to be ministered to? Well, duh, he's God. But what did he say he came to do? He came to minister and to give his life as a ransom for many. That ought to be our attitude, to live our lives in service to others. Who is greatest in the kingdom? How did Jesus answer the question? And how do you become least? What did he say? Whoever serves Whoever serves the other is the one who is greatest in the kingdom. And think about that. If you're the parent and you're looking down, say you got 10 or 20 children in your charge, which child are you going to look at and say, oh, I just really appreciate that child? Is it the one who's trying to dominate the rest of them? Let's play King of the Hill. I'm King of the Hill. Oh, that's the child I love. No, you say, I'm going to take a stick to that kid. I'm going to beat that out of him. It's the child who's always trying to help and trying to serve. Those are the children that we look at and we say, that's the child that's getting it. That's the child that is mature. So we got off on this study based on a very good question about what about the different roles between men and women? Yes, Mike.
I have one other question, if you don't mind.
Okay, sure. Is it, different from this one about the roles?
Just slightly.
Okay.
Comes out of the same passage you read, Marty.
All right.
2 Timothy 2:8, verse 8. Because I want men everywhere to lift up holy hands in prayer. Now, there was a time when you could tell the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant by the way they prayed. One prayed this way, one prayed this way, but they both had their hands up like this.
Okay.
Now, we don't typically do that anymore. Now, is that what he's teaching us to do there, or, I'll leave it at that.
It's a very good question. And I didn't realize that this meant whether you were a Protestant or Catholic. I don't even know which is which. Which one's Catholic? You don't know either. Okay. But that's interesting that that's developed because probably one was a response to the other. Oh, they're going to pray this way? Oh, I don't like them, so I'm going to pray this way. Very godly approach. What is the Holy Spirit of God trying to get us to see here? Is he trying to get us to see, okay, now when you pray, you need to lift up your hands. Is that the point? By the way, is there anything sinful or wrong about lifting up your hands when you pray? No, there's not. Why don't we do it? Probably because we're afraid people will think we're Pentecostal. So I'm not going to pray like that. I'm going to keep my hands down. And I don't have any problem with keeping your hands down. Why is it we go to some congregations and you're preaching away and somebody's always, the whole congregation, amen, amen, preach on, brother. Is it because one's in the scriptures and one's not, or is it just that there's a cultural difference the way people respond to sermons? I think it's culture, and I think this is culture too. And I don't know that there's anything right or wrong with it, but consider this. If I were to use the phrase, I'm going to walk away with a clear conscience, you got some moral issue and you say, I'm going to walk away with a clear conscience. What's the emphasis on? Is it the clear conscience or is it on walking away? What's the most important aspect of that? Is walking away more important than having a clear conscience? That's what I'm asking. Or is it the clear conscience? Is that what's really important? I would think it would be the clear conscience. Walking away is just something you kind of throw in there to illustrate. It's, what's the word I'm looking for, the term? Accommodative language, we might say. How about thinking about somebody looking on you with favor? Looking on you with favor. Think about that phrase or that idea. What's the real focus? Is the focus on looking on somebody or is the focus on the favor aspect of it?
Favor aspect.
I think it's the favor. It's not, okay, you got to look on me. Well, you don't have to look on me, but I want you to hold me in favor. I'm not really concerned with walking away necessarily, but I am concerned with having a clear conscience. So I'll walk away with a clear conscience. You can look on me with favor. Or you're really upset with somebody. Say, pack your bags and leave.
That's lifting your hands in anger.
That's lifting your hands in anger. Pack your bags and leave. All right. Well, what's the real thing about, what do you want somebody to do? Pack your bags and leave. Do you really want them to pack their bags, or is the whole point, get out of here? To me, it's, I want you out of here. Whether you pack your bags or not, I just want you gone. If you leave your stuff, we'll throw it away for you. But pack your bags and leave is one of those things where you might tell somebody you're fired. Who's the guy that's always saying, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired? Donald Trump, yeah, you're fired. Pack your bags and leave. And he's not concerned, or I wouldn't be concerned. You probably wouldn't be concerned with people packing their bags, but we are saying you don't need to be here anymore. So when Paul writes, I want men in every place to pray, lifting up holy hands without wrath and dissension, what's the real important part of that text? I think he says lifting up hands just as a matter of course. He's not saying, here's your instruction. When you pray, you better get your hands in the air.
Read that verse.
Therefore, I want the men in every place to pray, lifting up holy hands without wrath and dissension.
Okay. There can be a difference in translation.
Okay, how does your translation have it?
I want men everywhere to lift up holy hands in prayer.
Okay,
That would lead you not to take the position your suggestion, whereas your translation would.
okay. I'm still thinking the main point is the holiness.
Yeah, I would agree, but the way this is translated says, I want men everywhere to lift up holy hands in prayer. In other words, lift them up, get them up, and pray.
Okay. Now here's the way I would look at this. And I'm not saying this is right, but I'm trying to think through the way people talk and even the way the Holy Spirit would inspire Paul to say this. To me, the lifting up of hands is incidental, but what's absolute is the holiness. In other words, if we gather around the table to have a meal and we hold hands, do we have to hold hands like this? Or can we hold hands like this? Is God, what's God concerned with here? Is he really concerned, okay, I want you guys to get your hands in the air when you pray? Or
That you have a clean heart.
that's what I think it is. Now, God may call me into question. Well, he doesn't call anybody into question. He knows. He doesn't have any questions, but he may call me into account for this, but I don't think so.
I think it's just telling all men and all women. I think it's referring to both. I think the men part here refers to both men and women.
Okay.
And I think that, not only women are supposed to dress modestly, but men are also.
Sure.
And so I think that he's talking to them as one of his people, the men and the women.
Okay. Well, as a matter of fact, when it says, we read men, the word is andros, and that means men. So he's speaking specifically to men here. When Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, what did he mean? How many countries have you been to? Been to Arkansas. That's several counties from here. Did he really mean, okay, I want each one of you to go into every country and I want each one of you to preach to every creature? We know he didn't mean that.
Sending them out to different places.
Sure, we know he wants us to go, and everywhere we go, he wants us to preach. So, is this similar to that? Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Well, I haven't gotten that done yet, and I don't plan to go to the rest of the countries. Wouldn't it be great, though, if we could travel to every country? Wouldn't it be even greater if everywhere we went, we found an audience for the gospel? Are there any people in Choctaw that need to hear? Maybe we should finish here before we move on. Alan?
Does that mean I need to be reading to my dog?
Well, it does say every creature, doesn't it? Depending on your translation. When you can look at Matthew, I think it says all the nations, every ethnos, every ethnic group. Any more commentary or question on this? Johnny and then AJ.
Well, not really a question, but when you look at prayer in the Bible, we've seen, we read about different positions, that we kneeling, praying, lift holy hands. What is holy? What is holy?
Well, holy means committed to God.
Set
face down to God.
Well, the Greek word for worship,
Those were acceptable prayers.
yeah, right. I agree. Proskeuno is the Greek word for worship, and it means prostrate. You're on the ground. How many of us worship laying on the ground we don't do that, but our hearts are prostrate before the Lord. Just like when we talk about standing before the Lord or bowing before the Lord, let's bow ourselves in prayer. Well, we bow our heads a little bit, but when's the last time we just really bowed down? When I was a kid, there were a couple of men in the congregation, when they were called on to pray, they would get out in the aisle and kneel down in the center aisle. And I was impacted by it. Wow, he's taking a physical stand to show all of us how our hearts should be. I don't think that means we have to pray kneeling, because that's not a New Testament requirement, but it's still wide open for that. Judy?
When we were younger, at least I was younger, the congregation we attended always stood to pray, and that got our attention. That was the thing.
Yes, it'll get your
Oh, yes, AJ.
What I was going to say was, I know it's in the Old Testament, but it's in 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear them from heaven and will forgive them their sins and will heal their land. I think more of the point of probably the lifted hands is kind of like you were saying, a cultural thing, how you would show respect or worship to your master. You would raise your hands or go to the knee or prostrate yourself before him to show that you humbled yourself. That
Right.
You are less than he is.
I would agree with that there aren't any positions given in Scripture that we have to take in order to be right before God. It's the heart. And sometimes it's very helpful to take a position that gives an example of what your heart is doing, but it's not a requirement. I agree with you that it's what people do in the heart that really makes the most difference to God. Any more discussion or commentary on this? Anybody learn anything through this? I have. Just had something I was going to say, and I can't remember what it was. Must have been thinking about the hereafter. I guess you all have heard that joke, haven't you? You walk from the bedroom into the living room, and you stop there and you think, what am I hereafter? That's anyway. All right. Oh, I know, I think I remember this is what I wanted to say. Who gives anybody a word of prophecy? Where does that come from? I asked, who gives anyone a word of prophecy? If a word of prophecy is given, where does it come from? It comes from God. It doesn't come from men, it comes from God. So if God chooses, for example, to give Deborah a word of prophecy, I'm not going to say, now God, you said we're not supposed to have women in positions of authority over men. And it's interesting, when you go back and you read that whole context, well, going back there, we'll just spend a little bit of time here in Judges. Judges chapter 4. And this is a record of history. What there is not, and of course what I'd like to see there is a little section giving us all the details about why God gave a woman the ability to prophesy rather than giving this to a man. But that's not there. This is just what God recorded happened in history. Judges chapter 4, verse 1. Then the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. Y'all remember Ehud, don't you? He was the left-handed dagger jabber. He went in and killed Eglon, the king of the Moabites. and saved them from the Philistine. Anyway, the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor, and the commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. They had interesting ways of naming places back then. It says, the sons of Israel cried to the Lord, for he had 900 iron chariots, and he oppressed the sons of Israel severely for 20 years. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at the time. When you read down through this entire context, it's as if the men of Israel abandoned any kind of spiritual, what's the word I'm looking for here? I don't want to say spiritual authority, but spiritual initiative. Like they weren't taking anything on. They were just blacks. Barak was the guy chosen to lead Israel, and he didn't want to lead Israel. Look at what he says in verse 8. Barak said to her, if you will go with me, saying this to Deborah, then I will go, but if you will not go with me, I will not go. So here's a man, here's the guy who's going to be the military leader of Israel against their enemies, and he says, I'm only going to go if you, Deborah, will go with me. And she says in verse 9, I will surely go with you, nevertheless the honor, what honor? The honor of victory shall not be yours on the journey that you are about to take, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hands of a woman. And then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. Was Deborah that woman? No, it was a woman by the name of Jael. Barak, sure enough, went forth. They battled against their enemies. And who was the enemy king here? Sisera. He turned into Jael's tent. It says in verse 17, Sisera fled away on foot in the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. For there was peace between Jabin the king of Hazor and the house of Heber the Kenite. And Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, turn aside, my master, turn aside to me, do not be afraid. And he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. He said to her, please give me a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty. So she opened a bottle of milk and gave him a drink. And then she covered him. What generally happens to you once you drink milk in the heat of the day? Take a little nap. Happens to me when I eat dairy in the middle of the day, especially. She probably didn't pull it out of a refrigerator either, I don't imagine. At any rate, he said to her, stand in the doorway of the tent, and it shall be if anyone comes and inquires of you and says, is there anyone here, that you shall say no. But Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg and seized a hammer in her hand and went secretly to him and drove the peg into his temple. And it went through into the ground, for he was sound asleep and exhausted. So it's like, why do you need to say, so he died? It's like, I think that would be a foregone conclusion. If he did wake up, man, can you imagine a headache? Behold, as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out of the tent to meet him and said, come, I'll show you the man whom you're seeking. And he entered with her, and behold, Sisera was lying dead with a tent peg in his temple. So, what's going on? What's all this about? Why did God put this bit of history in here? Well, for one thing, it is history. God didn't cover things up. He exposes things so that we might read them and learn something. How was Deborah identified? Who is Deborah? Yes, a prophetess, but also, how else is she identified? She's also a judge. She judged Israel sitting under the tree, but how else is she identified? She's the wife of Lapidoth. Who's Lapidoth? Who knows? So why would she be identified by him? Because God says, all right, here she is, Deborah, the prophetess. I gave her a prophecy. I didn't give Lapidoth a prophecy. I gave her the prophecy. She's got the ability to judge Israel sitting under the tree, but we're going to put it in that she's the wife of Lapidoth because that's how we do it. Who is Jael? How is she identified? Look at verse 17. She's the wife of Heber. Who's Heber? Where was he? Nobody knows where he was. Nobody knows what he did. She was just her husband, and she is identified as the wife of Heber the Kenite. When I read this, I see a very dark time in the history of Israel. Not dark because Deborah was judging, not dark because Jael saved them from Sisera, the enemy general, but dark because men were not picking up the lead. They were turning it over to their women. They weren't taking the initiative. They weren't standing up for God. And this is a dark time, I think, in Israel's history, not because the women failed, because the men failed and the women had to pick up the gauntlet. That's what I'm seeing here. Johnny?
So the men were not fit to be, in God's eyes, fit to be a prophet.
It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. Because there were also female prophets in the New Testament. Remember Philip? He had, was it 7 daughters who prophesied? Why did God give them the ability to prophesy? I'm not sure. But did they become eldresses or deaconesses in the church? See, there's no evidence of that. How many congregations of the church are mentioned in the New Testament? How many elders, how many deacons, how many ministers, and yet not a single one of them is mentioned as being a woman? Is that because women are inferior, or is that because God's got a different plan for women?
God has a different plan.
He's got a different plan. He's got a different plan. If you had sitting in your driveway a 4x4 pickup and a Jaguar, and you're ready to go do some dove hunting in September, what are you going to take? Who said that? I'm going to take a Jaguar. I've never driven a Jaguar before. Okay, maybe it's a bad way to illustrate that. But you see what I'm saying? It's not about one being inferior to the other or superior to the other. It's purpose. God built men with a specific purpose in mind. He built women with a specific purpose in mind. And He doesn't want those purposes to be interchanged or exchanged or changed at all. What do we say about this homosexual marriage thing? It's not Adam and Steve. It's Adam and Eve. You go back to the beginning to get the pattern. God laid down the pattern in the beginning, and anything else is not God's pattern. And so when He teaches us, here's the way I want it. I made the man and I made the woman to help the man. And if the man's got any sense, he'll listen to his woman. But if the woman's got any sense, she won't boss her man either. It works both ways. We've got to learn to work as a united, single, oneness unit without anybody trying to get accolades over the other. It's not about that. It's about living and working in unity. Robin?
I think sometimes the confusion comes in with the whole women's role. I mean, obviously, the qualifications of elders and deacons, we understand, those are pretty specific. And like we went over in Timothy, the organization of worship, understand that. But as far as women, I mean, even the history of this congregation, at one point in time, it was like pretty adamant that like once a teenage boy became a Christian, it was like women can't teach. And I'm thinking, okay, now I'm married and I've got 2 boys. Tyler's baptized. I'm not going to stop teaching him because from the examples that I have in Scripture,
Right.
is that I would be wrong. That would be a great sin on me not to teach
Right.
him. And when he turns 18, I'm not going to cease teaching him. Same thing for Kyle when he makes the decision to become
Absolutely.
a Christian. It'll be the same thing for him. I'm not going to stop teaching him just because he was baptized or because of the fact that he turns 18 in our culture that's considered an adult. I mean, that's just not going to happen. So I think sometimes we have to make sometimes the situation is just all relative and there is a gray there. And I think that's what sometimes the confusion comes in where we have some people that are pretty adamant that once that's done, then you can't teach. And I don't see that taught anywhere here.
I don't either. As a matter of fact, where did Timothy get his faith?
From Eunice and,
From his mother and his grandmother. And we ought to be asking, where was the dad? Where was the granddad? Of course, his mother was Jewish. His father was Gentile. Does that really have anything to do with it? Well, if we go back and look at the situation, we might say, well, I understand this better, but How much better would it have been if we would read about fathers taking the responsibility to teach the faith to their sons and their daughters so that the moms wouldn't have to do it? Now, if the dad's doing it, does that mean that the mom doesn't have any responsibilities? I wouldn't be a Christian today. I don't think. I'm not trying to profess anything prophetically, but I don't think I'd be a Christian today if it wasn't for my mom, because she's the one who taught me. She was the one who was a member of the church. My dad was a great guy. As a matter of fact, when he died, he worked for the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare in southern West Virginia. And I don't know how much you know about southern West Virginia, but there's a lot of poverty. A lot of poverty. And so while he worked, and I didn't know what he did, I was just a kid, he helped so many people that when he died, we had his funeral at the little church there in Rock Creek, West Virginia, and there were all kinds of people there, poor people. I had no idea who they were. And they were all people in that area that Dad had helped. And they just came. That's how good a guy he was. But he wasn't a member of the church. And so he never taught me faith of the Scriptures. I learned by watching him how a good man might behave, but that was all outside the context of him being a Christian. So where did I learn Christianity? Well, I learned some principles from him as far as respecting others and caring about others and some important, very important concepts. But as far as who took me to worship, who took me to Bible class, who made sure that I was involved, well, it was my mom. So,
And if your mother was still alive and you had a question about the Bible, you might discuss that with
Sure.
her and take her opinion.
sure.
Women are always to teach their children. I don't care how old they are, 50 or
You never sign off on that job, do you?
no. You're to be an example to them, a good enough example that if they do have a question, that they can trust what you're going to tell them.
I think so.
I had my first Bible when I was 12, 13 years old. I was reading it and a passage confused me, and I wrote inside, "Ask Nanny or preacher." That's where I got my information.
That's pretty good.
My grandmother was a great, wonderful Christian woman, and if I had questions about things and I couldn't get to the preacher on time, Nanny explained this to me.
You bet.
Well, this is a class on supposed contradictions, and we had a question that was leading us in that direction, but it has really degenerated into a marvelous study. So, you didn't catch that, did you? You just, what is he saying? It's been a great study. I really enjoyed it, but our time is gone, apparently. I did have, let me just give you couple of the questions that I was ready to go into this morning, assuming we had finished that. This is number 92 from the website Skeptic's Annotated Bible. What did the centurion call Jesus when he died? And in one place, he calls him the Son of God. In another place, he calls him a righteous man. What did he call Jesus when he died? Here's a really good one. Is circumcision required? And I read that and I thought, really? Give me a break. You don't understand the difference between circumcision in the New Covenant and in the Old Covenant? Number 102. Did Jesus forewarn the apostles of his death and resurrection? And what he does is he goes to John chapter 20 and verse... Where are we here? Oh, verse 4. And uses that to say that Jesus had never told the apostles about his forthcoming death, burial, and resurrection, when there are numerous cases right there in the Gospel of John where John records that he did. But what he says is not that he never told them. And we'll, Lord willing, look at some of these things next week. Anybody have any other seeming contradictions or alleged contradictions? All right. Well, since the first bell's rung, there's not really much point in going into anything else. If you'll behave quietly and nicely, And not bother the other children in the hallways. I'll turn you loose.